Hi, everybody. This is Andrew Shikiar. I'm Executive Director and CMO at FIDO Alliance. Thanks so much for joining today. As those of you who follow us closely likely know, we've had a very busy first half of the year at FIDO, particularly around FIDO2. This includes seeing both Android and Windows 10 becoming FIDO2 certified platforms, and also seeing FIDO2 become an official web standard as WebAuthn was formally ratified within W3C. Collectively, these three things really expanded the reach and number of addressable users who can leverage FIDO authentication. Additionally, I think these developments have helped really catalyze and drive the market forward. And as a result, there are many organizations of all shapes and sizes working on internal or external FIDO2 deployments, which is great to see. As for a little background, within FIDO Alliance, we do three things. First, we create technical standards. All right, so we've released FIDO UAF, U2F, and now FIDO2. Secondly, we run certification programs for conformance testing and interop testing, and also to assess security and biometric performance. And the third thing we do is we focus on market enablement. And so we tackle this last thing through general outbound market education, events, PR, things like that. But perhaps most valuable are the internal working groups that we have that are focused on a variety of regions and deployment scenarios. So these are groups of actual deploying companies who share best practices, identify requirements, and communicate amongst themselves to help kind of advance their own efforts and also the industry's efforts at large. And these deployment working groups include, we have a consumer deployment working group focused on large scale deployments. We have an enterprise deployment working group focused on employee authentication. And then our most recently formed group is called the Government Deployment Working Group. So I'm very pleased today to have expert speakers here to share a bit about FIDO's work with governments in general, including the Government Deployment Working Group. And then we also have representatives from the GSA, from the US government, here to share details on their FIDO2 deployment for Login.gov. So before we start, I want to run through a couple of housekeeping items. Actually, first of all, let me introduce the speakers. So the speakers, we have Steve Urcioli with GSA, Jonathan Hooper with 18F, who's works with GSA. We have Mike MacGrath from OneSpan, who's also the co-chair of the FIDO Government Deployment Working Group, and then I will serve as your moderator today from FIDO Alliance. So back to those housekeeping items. All attendees are in listen-only mode. You can ask questions through the GoToWebinar client, and we'll try to answer them midstream if possible. There's a little chat dialog box on the client. At the end, we'll also take Q&A. So any questions that we don't answer midstream, we'll put in a queue and answer at the end, where we'll also be joined, by the way, by David Turner, who's a technical director here at FIDO Alliance, in case you have any more technical questions for his to be addressed to David. And then at the end, you'll see a survey. Please do take the survey at the conclusion of the webinar. This really helps us shape our webinar program moving forward. And then last but not least, yes, the webinar is being recorded and the slides will be emailed to you and a link will be emailed to you following the webinar itself. So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce Michael MacGrath, the chair of the FIDO Government Deployment Working Group from OneSpan. Mike.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew, and hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Michael MacGrath. I'm Director of Global Regulations and Standards at OneSpan and have the privilege of chairing the Government Deployment Working Group. You can go to the next slide. The Deployments Working Group, we go by GDWG. It is, as Andrew had indicated, we are a new working group. We were just launched in January of this year. And as Andrew had stated, there's a lot of activity going on in FIDO, and there's increased awareness and adoption in the government space. So the board of FIDO established the GDWG to act as subject matter experts and internal advisors within the alliance on issues affecting the deployment of FIDO solutions by governments for both enterprise and citizen-facing applications. So we cover both the employee side and things like e-government services requiring strong authentication. Next slide. Okay, so the scope of the GDWG, we are under a charter, and we are to identify challenges within the ecosystem that are unique to government and recommend solutions where possible. We also derive requirements, identify best practices and policies, and publish white papers. We are in the process of putting those together as we speak. And also participate in webinars like today to address government adoption. And I think you guys will learn a lot from the General Services Administration today. We do not work in a vacuum, and we partner with the other working groups that have been long established within the Alliance. In addition, we get a lot of feedback from the board. The board's not just made up of government folks, it's also made up of commercial relying parties, consumers, device and handset manufacturers, as well as mobile network operators. So the Alliance really is an information sharing group, and we look to leverage a lot of the work that's been done thus far within the Alliance and come out with some new educational materials and promotional materials to address government needs. Next slide. Okay, so this slide lists shows the logos of some very familiar companies that are actively participating in the Government Deployment Working Group. And as you can see, the logos, it's heavily commercial. Really our task is to add a lot of flags. You'll see the United States and the United Kingdom flags here. They are participating in the working group. There are several agencies within the US government that are participating and have deployed FIDO, and we're going to hear about GSAs today. And also the UK Cabinet Office is also participating in the Government Deployment Working Group and supports FIDO in the Gov.uk Verify program. So that's really all I have for today. I will say just a pitch for recruitment. The GDWG is open to all FIDO members. We would really like to balance this and have a lot more government participation. So if there are government folks on the call today and you want to join, please reach out to FIDO. And we meet every other week. So I will hand it off to Jonathan and Steve to provide their overview of Login.gov and FIDO2. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mike. Yes, hello, I'm Jonathan Hooper. I'm a software developer with 18F. I work on Login.gov with my colleague Steve, who's also here, who will be talking to you a little bit today. And we have some exciting stuff to tell you sort of about what led us to adopt or what led us to deploy FIDO2 onto Login.gov. Sort of how we did it, what sort of resources we used, some of our observations from our initial implementation and the things we've changed, and then also we're going to go through and talk about some of the stuff that we are looking ahead to. We also have some real exciting data to share about adoption. But before we get started, first thing to do is, in case you're not familiar, talk a little bit about what Login.gov is actually. And I'll start with what we're trying to do, which is describe our mission: simplify secure access to online federal services for the public, reduce costs for the agencies. So our goal here is two parts. One, make it easy to log in to government services, and then two, make it cheap for agencies to allow people to log in to government services online. And the way that we're approaching that now is with Login.gov, which is it's an identity provider. Provides single sign-on to a bunch of applications right now, USA Jobs, Trusted Traveler program, and things like that. And this lets us, there's a few advantages for this one. It's this shared thing. It lets agencies focus on their mission. It also allows us to adopt some best practices around, security and account management, and sort of put them up in front of all of these government agencies by, sort of just doing the work in one place and login. So, a few things there, like we've got strong password requirements that are a little bit more modern than what you might be used to seeing on government websites. We also have mandatory MFA in front of a whole bunch of applications in the government, and also now FIDO2 support. So this is what we decided we wanted to show you what our implementation actually looks like before we get going into it. So this is on enrollment or sign up. So whenever you sign up for a Login.gov account, you put in your email address and password. We send you an email, you confirm your email, and then you set up MFA. We have this menu of MFA options that you can choose from. We call the FIDO2 part of that security key. So you choose security key. That throws up this screen here where you give it a nickname. Then we prompt you to stick your key into your computer or whatever. If it's a platform authenticator, touch your thumbprint. Generally just hand it off to the browser with the FIDO or with the API, and then once you successfully enrolled, we show you this fun little screen here with the green check mark telling you that you've done that. And then on sign in, you put in your email address and password. We prompt you to put your key in and touch the button. And once you've done that, a nice little success screen, and then you go into your account. So yeah, there you go. Just a quick rundown of what it looks like so that you can imagine something as we talk about it. But anyway, so why do we actually implement FIDO2? So the main thing that we were thinking about whenever we were deciding to do this is security. Right now on our platform, SMS is the most popular option for people for MFA, and that has, there's obvious drawbacks to having SMS that are talked about at length in other places that we don't have to go into. But yeah, we wanted to provide people with an alternative to SMS, and FIDO2 looked promising. Also, we saw a lot of issues with phishing, especially around accounts that were controlling like banking information or stuff like that, with people actually phishing codes to beat MFA. And of course, one of the main draws of FIDO2 is that it is phish proof. So that seemed like a good way to start building a solution for that problem. Additionally, there was a cost aspect to it. SMS is extremely expensive for us. We pay a lot of money to send a lot of codes to people every day. And then finally, there's a compliance component here as well. NIST 863B is the standard that describes how we should be doing authentication. There's some language in there. It's moved around and changed a little bit, but this is what it says as of today. The general gist is basically just that SMS is discouraged. You should be looking for alternatives. So we have a little bit of motivation to move away from SMS and start providing alternatives there. So with that, sort of with the why laid out, I'll hand off to Steve, who's going to tell us a little bit about the how.
Hi, I'm Steve Ursioli. I'm an engineer on Login.gov. I'm going to go through our implementation and the analytics we gathered. So the good news is all of our code is for Login.gov is on open source, and it's on GitHub. It's under repo 18F identity IDP. So we implemented FIDO2 in 1 2-week sprint last November. And most of the information we used, most of the primary source of knowledge was Google's blog post on developers.google.com, namely enabling strong authentication with WebAuthn. It was infinitely valuable for us. And then for server-side processing, we were lucky enough to find a WebAuthn root gem. And that did a lot of the heavy lifting for us in terms of the back-end processing. So with the combination of Google's blog and the Ruby gem, we were able to develop this solution very quickly. We also used the W3C reference material to drill down further for clarification on any issues we encountered. So some of the challenges we faced, it was very heavy JavaScript in an app that normally isn't, but that really wasn't a huge issue. Some of the things we tried to nail down initially were the schema. So what were we actually going to be storing for each user? Essentially, it's a public key and a credential ID along with the nickname that the user supplies. But initially, we were confused over which ID would be passed back. We didn't understand from the article if it was referencing the ID that we supplied or if there was some new ID. But it was obviously this credential ID that was being supplied. For protocols, there was some confusion on that. Initially, we just decided to roll what was in the sample application that Google posted, and we would implement, address the protocols in a later iteration. For attestation, that also was an issue that we had to understand better. Initially, we rolled out with attestation as direct, but we found out later that we actually wanted none, since none of the users were, since we weren't going to be acting on the device that was supplied, nor did we want the user to be clicking on a pop-up. Support of non-FIDO2 keys. So initially, when we were testing, we had several hardware keys that were failing, and we couldn't understand why. And then as it turns out, we realized a lot of those keys, or most of those keys, were not FIDO2. So we looked into supporting them, and we decided that was a much heavier lift than simply implementing WebAuthn. So we decided we'd pass on support for that, and then we would revisit later. And then finally, for error handling, we wanted to gather as much data as possible for our analytics to log failures, so that, if we actually implemented it wrong, we would know what was going wrong. And then obviously we wanted to have the widest scope of adoption as possible. So we wanted to know what errors we potentially were causing. So with the front end, we developed a scheme whereby we would have a redirect to an error code, so we could log that in our analytics. And then also we would log as much information as possible on the back end. So that helped tremendously initially to test it, and then we rolled out. So we rolled out, and we didn't know what to expect. And for the scope of adoption, initially we had about 2K new FIDO2 keys per month, which is about 1/5 of 1% of our new users, which wasn't great. So we theorized that the number is so low simply because most of our users preferred using their phone as their MFA method. And that was happening like a majority of the time. So last month, we made a significant change. We started requiring new users to register a second MFA. So at that point, we shot up to about 17,000 new keys per month, which is a significant change, and we were very excited about that. So right now we have about 27,000 FIDO2 keys registered, and the adoption rate is about 3% of all new users, which is, again, a huge jump from the 1/5 of 1%. And we get about 1 million new users per month. So projecting forward, we have 15 million users. So if we required that those users registered a second MFA, we're projecting that that would be about 500,000 new FIDO2 keys, which is tremendous. So we're being cautious about rolling that out, since requiring second MFA would be a big change for existing users, and we're still working on improving the UI experience. So improvements that we've made. So one of the big things we did is that depending on whether the browser supported it or not, we would show the option to the user. Initially, they would click on security key and then get a page where it said, sorry, not supported. So that wasn't an ideal experience, and we updated that. Next slide.
Yeah. And then, yeah, this is me. One of the, you know, obviously one of our more popular features is Remember Device. It's something that that users ask for whenever we have pretty much any MFA method that doesn't support it, because it does get annoying to type in your code every time. This is basically, you know, you MFA on your laptop, you check Remember Device, you don't have to MFA on that laptop again for another 30 days. We did not initially support this for WebAuthn. The reason for that was on this screen to your left, what we did before was sort of a implementation that we saw elsewhere, where the user would insert their key, you know, touch the button of the key or whatever they have to do, and then be immediately redirected to the next part of the flow. Like they'd be signed in, or they'd have to go like to the next step to set up their account or whatever. And there wasn't really a place for a Remember Device checkbox in here, because the browser actually, once it shows that pop-up, sort of takes over, and the user's not able to interact with the screen, at least on most browsers. So there wasn't an opportunity for the user to choose to remember the browser. So we ended up adding this success screen in here, where the user could elect to remember this browser after they insert their key and verify it. And then also, just for fun, we put this unfishable badge up on the account. So if you have an account that is that has only either security keys or PIV or CAT cards, so the government ID cards that we all carry around with us, at least government employees. If you have only those on your account, no phone, TOTP, any of the other phishable methods, you get this fun little badge there. And yeah, and then we also added some data on collected some data on platform authenticators as part of our improvements, which Steve can tell you more about.
Yeah, so we're very excited about platform authenticators because support at the device level would increase our adoption dramatically by not requiring users to go out and buy a separate key. So we had no data on how many users actually had this capability. So we released another set of code that actually gathered this info for us. And here's the data we found. So first, just the general statistics. A majority of our users are desktop over mobile, which is contrary to the normal population. This is simply a function of the demographic that we currently support in the government. There are specific applications that we support, and it just so happens that those demographics lean towards more desktop. And then as far as browsers are concerned, Chrome is the dominant one, and followed by Safari. And then next slide. So here's the big data here is that 6% of our users have a device that can act as a platform authenticator. And so that kind of gives us a minimum upper bound on the adoption. And then obviously those users that have separate hardware keys would increase that that upper bound. So, and that's, you know, literally a double the adoption rate that we have now, right? So we're at 3%, and the minimum upper bound is 6%, maybe 1 or 2% more. So we're excited about potentially doubling our adoption. And next slide. So, so this is at the OS support. Users are mostly Windows, yet a majority of the users with platform authenticators are Android, which is 62% on the next chart there. So even though Android is only 11% of our users, it's responsible for 62% of our platform authenticators. Next slide. And then here is the screen that essentially allowed us to dramatically increase our adoption, where a user finishes setting up the first MFA, and then they're required to add another method. So we thank this screen tremendously.
Yeah, the purpose for adding this was originally to increase our or to help users with recovery, we wanted users to have a second method, so that if they lost their first one, they would they'd have another way to get back into their account. But it looks like a lot of people, when they get here, they shop around the options, and whenever they get to security key, it seems like many of them realize they can actually use their phone as a security key, and then enroll with that. So we're talking about Android users here who realize that their phone works on that page.
Yeah, and the analytics on that actually says that 25% of the users actually visit that security key page. So it's pretty dramatic that they're actually looking at it. So we're excited that the platform authenticators would actually get a larger portion of those users.
Which brings us, oh, no worries. Which brings us to the next part, looking ahead at improvements that we want to make, things that we want to do to increase adoption. Sort of our challenges that we're finding here are letting people who can enroll with a WebAuthn or FIDO2 know that that's an option for them, and educate them about what it is and how to set it up, while at the same time not confusing the set of our users who are not able to do that, who don't have a key, don't have a platform authenticator, anything like that. So that part of it, both for users who are enrolling, so for our users who are signing up, and then again for our existing set of users, especially as the ease with which that you could set up a FIDO2 device as it gets easier as time goes on and the technology gets better. So the big thing that we're really excited about, we've talked a lot about platform authenticators. It's really on our mind because we're working right now on some user research around prompting users to set up whatever their device is named, rather than a security key, using the security key language. So we're doing some user research around this. So far, what looks the most promising to us is keeping the security key option for users who actually have the physical key, and then adding an additional option if a user visits with the platform authenticator, saying, use your Android phone, use your MacBook with like Touch ID, use your Windows Hello device, that sort of a thing, so that and then users will come in, they'll see that and be like, oh yeah, I can use the thumbprint reader on my phone or whatever. That's nice, and hopefully set it up. So yeah, like I said, we're doing a bunch of user research user research around this, trying to figure out the best way to start introducing this to users, and it's really exciting. There's a few other things we're looking at. The big one, again, existing users are a concern. So we are working on adding, generally working on adding MFA checkups for people who sign in. The reasoning for that is so that people change their phone number, they lose their backup codes, whatever. We can show them a prompt that says, hey, do you still have all of these methods? If not, would you like to replace one that you don't have with a method that you do have? And at that point, there's also an opportunity to inform users sort of about the increased security of using FIDO2 for their account, and hopefully encourage them to set one up then. So that's kind of like where our heads are at around improving it, and we do look forward to hopefully getting this adoption increased. So yeah, that is what I got. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you guys. So I thought that was a really interesting overview of Login.gov. We have several questions. Interestingly, the questions seem to be kind of gravitating around usability and education, and I think a lot of that you started to address with what you're doing moving forward. So it looks like you have some really kind of bold ideas, and you're doing data-driven analysis on how to best engage the Login.gov users on using FIDO authenticators, security keys, or the platform authenticator. So let me just dig into some of these questions. And so Steve or Jonathan, I'll kind of let you pick who answers these to kind of cross over your areas. So how will Login.gov provision users for a FIDO roaming authenticator?
For a what?
A roaming a security key, a roaming authenticator. How do you provision users?
So by the roaming authenticator, is that the, I'm not totally familiar what that is. Yeah, is that? Oh, so you're talking about
security
about
key.
the actual keys? Yeah, the keys. What do you mean by the question? How will we provision users for them, or will we provision them for users?
Yeah. So if Lorraine, if you want to follow up with a more detailed question, that would be helpful. We'll come back to that one.
Yeah, I mean, I can say a little bit about, like, I mean, if the question is what I think it's getting towards, I mean, users provide their own keys. We don't provide keys to users, so you have to go out and buy a a token in order to be able to use it with Login.gov.
Are you pointing people to the criteria?
Sorry, what's that?
Do you point people to the criteria they should look for in purchasing a key?
We don't right now. We have a little bit of information about security keys on our in our FAQ content. Stuff that we put up there, regular questions we get around security keys, though it's primarily aimed at people who see the option and wonder what it is. I don't think that there's anything in there directed towards helping users know what kind of keys to buy. And yeah, as as the federal government questions about, like, and trying to tell people what sorts of things to buy does also get us, it can get a little bit tricky legally.
There has been talk at the agency level to actually send out keys to certain agencies that are like consistently targeted by phishing attacks. So there has been talk of just giving all of their users a FIDO2 key. So that's
there's also
been discussed.
Can users register multiple security keys, multiple authenticators? So if I have a platform authenticator and a roaming security key, can I register both with you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a day one feature.
Yep. Let's kind of skimming through the questions here. Let's talk a little bit about attestation and metadata service. I know you mentioned this briefly, but do you plan on using metadata service as part of your rollout?
I mean, yeah, we don't have any immediate plans around that, no. So yeah, I mean, our approach to our approach has been that we're not super concerned about what keys people are using to sign up. I don't think that we've really found a compelling reason to be concerned about that.
Okay. We've had a couple questions on this topic, so be curious to get your thoughts on account recovery. And that's a ongoing focus area inside of FIDO Alliance. We have some forthcoming initiatives that we'll be talking about soon that help address this. But how do you look at account recovery today?
I can start this one, and then I'll hand back off to you, Steve, because it is a big question. But right now, the way that we manage account recovery is through a delete account flow. So the way that this works is, you forget your password. Obviously, you have to just demonstrate control of an email address in order to be able to reset it. That's pretty standard. If you lose one of your multi-factors, you lose both of them. Like I said, we require two. So if you've lost your primary and your recovery device, what we do now is allow you to request a account reset. So what that is going to do is put you into a two-day cooldown, after which you will be allowed to go and you'll get an email saying, hey, you can now reset your account. You click reset your account, and that will actually delete your Login.gov account and give you the opportunity to set up a new account. And then you can set up a new account with the same email address, different email address, same authenticators, different authenticators at that point, and then sign into whatever agency you were trying to go to. So those agents, the agencies you're signing into, they'll receive as part of the handoff your email address and also the unique identifier for your account. And whenever we do integrations, we tell the users that that unique identifier can change for a user, and that's usually because they have deleted their account as part of recovery, and then we let the individual applications each figure out sort of their own way to deal with users who have recovered an account. Anything you want to add, Steve?
Yeah, sure. So our platform is entirely self-serve, right? So we have a support staff, but yet the user is pretty much in charge of resetting their account. We're trying to minimize the number of account resets. So we're going to be implementing IAL2, which will allow them to re-verify. But for our IAL1, which is strictly by email, we do get a lot of account resets. So the requiring second MFA was an attempt to lessen the amount of account resets, because it's not ideal for the agency to have a UUID that changes. We'd like to make that as constant as possible. And at the agency level, they're forced with trying to relink a user, which potentially has now the same email as before, but a different UUID. So it's always a potential point of attack. So we're excited about going with IAL2, but in the meantime, so we've implemented push notifications where we're going to actually tell, we're actually going to push the change of the UUID to the agencies. So that would at least tell them that this user definitely did delete their account. And then some other, I guess for the immediate future, we're attempting to make the UI a much better experience, so that so that requiring a second MFA would legitimately get them something where they realize the value it has. Specifically, they're choosing backup codes a large portion of the time, and then they don't even have the backup codes printed. So it makes it very difficult to get that number down when our user experience is not conveying to them the importance of having that second factor. So I don't know if that gives more information, but we're definitely trying to get those account reset numbers down, and we're hoping by improving the UI that the second MFA will become more important, and then obviously increasing the FIDO2 adoption would be a significant change and bonus for us, especially if it's built into the platform, the device itself.
Yeah. Do you have any metrics on account resets that you have or are willing to share?
We do have those metrics. Offhand, I would say it's on the order of hundreds per day.
Okay.
I think it's roughly about 250 per day out of 15 million users. Yeah. Now, obviously, we probably get about, say about 300,000 unique users per day.
One of the really interesting problems that we're pursuing is related to reset is we have, and it's also a little unfortunate, is we have a lot of users who actually reset their accounts immediately after creating them. It looks like they get confused at that second MFA step where you ask them to set up the recovery or backup method, and they abandon having just set up one method, and then when they come back, they're prompted for their initial method, which for some reason they don't have, and then have to immediately reset their account. So we're working on making that flow a little bit more continuous, so that it's more likely that someone has set up a device that they can use to get into their account if they need to.
So it sounds like a lot of that kind of folds into some of the work you mentioned, kind of moving forward on education. and kind of reprioritizing, showing the benefits of using security keys or platform authenticators, and educating users on what this means and how to use them, et cetera. So it sounds like you're just getting started on that, which is good. Kind of a new thread of questions.
Generally, the users are in a mad rush to set up, right? They're wanting to get signed up so they can quickly get back to the site. So, any new screens or new setup options is generally, met with friction. So we're trying to make it as smooth as possible, obviously.
So if a FIDO2 key is registered, do you have any plans on not prompting for passwords at all? Someone has a key and kind of moving towards kind of a pass-through list and eventually eliminating that credential as well.
Yes, we are thinking about it. We have a few things we're throwing around. This question is actually a little bit complicated for us because we do some stuff with the password beyond just using it to authenticate the user. We also have when users reach the the account tier where they have data that they share with us, so personally sensitive, personally identifiable information, so things like their first name, last name, social security number, date of birth, things like that. Whenever we have an account where the user has shared that sort of stuff with us, we actually generate a key using the user's password as part of the key material and use that to encrypt the user's data. So we have that makes it difficult to take the password out of the equation entirely for us. But we are looking at ways. We're sort of starting with PIV-CAC because there's sort of a push for that from government users to be able to use their PIV or their CAC card to be able to log in. And we're coming up with a few ways sort of to work around that password requirement for the we call them the IL2 users, the verified users who've given us that PII. So things like keeping track of when the bundle has changed and only prompting for the password so we can decrypt it if the data that is in it has changed. That's sort of the big one that we're pushing towards right now.
Okay. So FIDO has a program for certified authenticator levels. Right? So we have 4 levels that are live with plans to go to 6 levels, which basically assess how well the private key is being protected. Have you looked at this program and thought about specifying any level of certification, either for step up or for different types of processes that you can do through Login.gov?
No, we have not looked into that.
Okay. Scanning through the question. As an aside, this is by far the most questions I think we've had on a webinar. So I'm just kind of the sheer volume here is tough to manage. Who's your typical user of Login.gov? Are these government employees, citizens? Do you have a feel for how that breaks down?
It depends on the application they are logging into. I mean, there's government employees. There are, just public citizens in there. I mean, examples, some of the applications we have, like the biggest one is USA Jobs, which is like the, government's job board, which is a lot of, that is a lot of government employees. We have a few things with the Department of Defense. Again, government employees, they have, they're in the military, they have the CAC cards they can use to log in. We also have, Trusted Traveler programs, another one of our really big ones, and that's going to be, completely different demographic, people who travel a lot internationally, or between Canada and the U.S. or Mexico and the U.S. So it's really variable, and it changes as we add new applications to Login.gov, or as new applications add Login.gov to themselves.
Sure. Here's kind of a building question. How many people were on the implementation that took 2 weeks? So you said 2 weeks to build this out. How large is your team who actually did that work?
Steve did it, and I think I reviewed it, and then we had a security person who reviewed it.
Wow, okay.
So 3 people.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you mentioned you're doing, you know, the user research. Have you gotten feedback from users? I mean, on the kind of the user experience aspect of security keys. You know, have you got any direct feedback that you can share?
So we have some old stuff from whenever we when we first set it up. The things that we've learned the things we've learned that we're sharing, the biggest one is that there's really not, like, we really could not find a good thing to call them. You know, people don't know what a WebAuthn token is. They don't know what a FIDO token is. People generally recognize what a security key is, but people who have no idea, like, that this concept exists are just super confused by it. You know, think it's like some sort of like key that, like, you know, like a key as in like a key that you're used to hearing, like encryption key, or like some sort of value that you would type in. It didn't help that at the time we had recovery codes that we called personal keys, which added to the confusion. But yeah, that was the least bad of the options, and it sort of resonated the most with people who had the tokens. The platform authenticator research, we are just starting up. We've got our prototypes built out, which is the screenshot you saw. We are talking to our first set of users for that on Thursday of next week. So we don't have anything to share around there, unfortunately. Though that's the stuff that's really exciting.
Is there anything else that you'd like to understand better that you kind of have, you know? So obviously you're working on the platform authenticators. Are there any, you know, on the research front, are there any particular areas that you're looking to hone in on with these users?
Yeah. So the things that we're trying to figure out, one, sort of reapproaching this question of how do we help users understand what a security key is, and what a platform authenticator is, and sort of working on adding, like I said, the education in there, without it, you know, being overwhelming for the user. Because like Steve said, they're not trying to, like, their goal is not to set up an account. Their goal is to, like, apply for a job or apply for a trusted traveler or something like that. So do education without getting in the way. That's one of the things that we're looking at. We're also looking at ways that we can convey to the users that particular options are recommended by us over others. So, like, we want to, you know, be able to tell users that your, you know, government ID or your security key is like what you should use if you have it. But if you don't have it, you know, it's okay. You can still set up like a TOTP app, so like an authentication application or something like that. And if you don't have that, okay, well, you can still set up a phone. And then, you know, if you don't have a phone, okay, well, we have this sheet of codes that you can print out. Sort of helping the users understand that that's kind of like the way that we would suggest creating, like the mindset we would suggest you have when you create your account, without, you know, making the process too burdensome for, you know, the huge percentage of users that can't use those preferred options.
And one of the numbers that we'd really like to gather is the percentage of people that are actually using platform authenticators. Since we're not doing attestation, we really have no way of knowing what percentage of the FIDO2 keys that are registered are actually platform authenticators. So that would be a good number for us to get, and it would be helpful in establishing the upper bound.
Yeah, right now we can only assume based off of the user agent whenever they set it up.
And can you recap again why you've chosen not to use attestation?
Yeah, Steve, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so initially we thought that we weren't going to be acting on the hardware device itself, and we weren't really going to be doing anything with that data, nor would we want to whitelist certain devices like the article said. So at that point, we just decided to turn off attestation because there was some pop-up that would come up that the user would have to click on, and we didn't think it was the most ideal experience, but maybe we should revisit that because it seems to be the only method to gather that data.
On that kind of pop-up theme question here, are you able to control the kind of the dialogues prompted by the browser during the security registration process? Is that something you manage?
It's not, no. That is the browser doing that. We would love it if there was a way to put like a prompt or something in there, or you know, a little, yes, more, the ability to interact with that a little bit more would be very nice.
And each browser handles it differently, and the message is different for each browser, so it's a little bit difficult.
Makes the FAQ more difficult to write.
Mm-hmm. So here's some questions on biometrics. So obviously, it sounds like any platform authenticator can have its own set of biometric modalities it supports. Do you plan to do anything beyond that? What the device itself can support? Do you want to specify biometrics?
So we've looked into it a little bit. I think we decided it maybe didn't make the most sense for our platform to have biometrics, at least not for MFA. So yeah.
Another kind of usability question. So if I've registered with a security key, do I need to use it each time? I mean, can I default to other methods?
You want to go ahead, Steve?
Yeah, you can definitely. What we do is we default to the most secure method to sign in. So hardware keys is very high up there. FIDO2, I think the only thing more secure than FIDO2 for us is PIV-CAC. So if the user has multiple methods registered, we'll default to immediately putting them into the most secure method, and then they have the option to change that as they're signing in. They can choose a different method. We are working on prioritizing them so the user can set up their own priority. And in other words, I always want to use my phone first.
Okay. Going back to kind of the management of this, of this project. So you talked about how you developed it. How is it being managed now? I mean, what's the team look like? Is it being managed by GSA? What's just for people who are trying to figure out how to deploy this within their own organizations? What are some things they need to consider, and how are you looking at this?
Deploy Login or deploy FIDO? Deploy
Login.gov and the FIDO aspects therein.
Yeah, so Login.gov is, because it comes out of 18F, which is part of TTS, Technology Transformation Service, within the Federal Acquisition Service, which is in the General Services Administration. That's sort of where we sit in the bureaucracy. The team, how many people are on the team? I would say 20, 30, something like that, right, Steve?
Yeah, so front end and back end developers, maybe 6 to 8. And then we have like a DevOps team, which is roughly another 8. And then project leads, different groups that handle agencies, there's probably another 8.
If you are interested in getting Login.gov in front of your app, the channel to reach out to, I believe it's the email to reach out to, I believe it's on our website, is partners@login.gov. All right, Steve?
Yeah, so for the general public, you can contact partners@login.gov.
Kind of an adjacent question. How are you looking at identity proofing today, and what's kind of missing through in that workflow, if anything is?
That is a very big question. So yeah, no, I can take it. I'll go ahead and then I'll throw it back to Steve. So what we've got now, so we're doing a pilot right now with an agency, and so the approach that we're using, we're trying to steer away from KBA. The approach that we're using now is people give us biographical information. We do a records check on that. It's just a credit bureau records check, and then we do address verification after that. And by address, we mean like, you know, some secure channels that we can use to reach you. Today, that's going to be either phone or mail. So we'll either text you a code or mail you a letter. The phone number or address that we use for the address check is asserted by the user. So the user actually tells us what phone number or address they want to use, and we do a records check against those. Phone is, you know, going to be with telecoms. So we check the identity associated with the phone number with the person who we've resolved, and then address is going to be again credit bureaus. So that's what's in production today. We're very close. We're waiting on some paperwork and stuff to getting our document authentication flow out, which is roughly the same thing. Steve has been working very hard on getting it ready to go, but it's the idea is that you take a picture of a government issued ID. So that's going to be a driver's license. We also have, like, you know, sort of midterm plans to add passport in there, but you take a picture of your ID. We do a check to verify that the ID is valid, so that it's actually, like, you know, a valid ID issued by the state that issued it. We do a records check with the DMVs to verify that the number on the ID is associated with matches all of the information that is also on the ID. We pool all of the data from the machine readable zone, and then we actually use that to resolve the person. And then we go to the address check after that. The big thing that is missing for us is the biometric check. We really also want to verify that the person who is presenting the document matches the person who is on the document by doing, you know, some facial matching there. That has been tough for us, trying to figure out how to do that well. But we have a vendor we're working with now to hopefully get something in for the biometric check. Hopefully within, like, you know, within six to 8 months. So there you go. That's kind of a high-level overview of where we are now. I don't know if Steve has anything to add that I left out.
Yeah, so as far as the document verification goes, we actually have a vendor that checks the authenticity of the document itself. So work with, you can either take a picture with your phone. So we have a mobile version where they can, they can actually take a picture with their phone, and then we have a desktop version where they can use a scanner, but you need obviously a high resolution image for this vendor to actually determine if the document itself is genuine. And then as far as selfie checking goes, we actually did have a version working, but it turned out to not be very reliable, and it was easily subverted. So we're looking at switching out vendors for that, but we actually had the code working for selfie checking, and we disabled it. And then other than that, after, so, you know, we're assuming we're going to get a certain adoption rate for, remote verification. So maybe it would be 30, 40, or 50%. And then to get to the rest of the public, we're planning on rolling out in-person proofing, which would be an online service where the user would register their credentials, and then they would visit the post office where they would verify the authenticity of whatever documents they have, and then via an API, we could assume that the user is verified at that point if the post office says it looks good. So we're actually working on the in-person proofing now as well, since the document verification looks ready to go.
Okay. Well, that was a big question to end with. So, and for those of you on the bridge, I'd say kind of watch this space. Obviously, FIDO, we're focused on user authentication, but the adjacent threat vectors are also certainly relevant to our ongoing work. So with that, I want to wrap up. So first of all, thank you all, and thanks to the guys from GSA. Steve and Jonathan, so much for sharing your case study and also answering all these questions. We probably could have spent another 90 minutes with questions. Thank you also to Mike MacGrath for joining and talking about the Government Deployment Working Group and that work happening inside of FIDO. And then thank you all for joining today. It is great to have such interaction, so many questions. We did not get to all the questions. We'll do our best to follow up by email. This presentation, again, was recorded, and we will share the archive and the link with you in a follow-up email. Last but not least, as you sign out, please do take a moment to fill in the survey. We're very eager to get your feedback. So thank you all, and I hope to see you on a future FIDO webinar.
Thank you.